dead in seconds, in front of millions of children watching because she was one of them, a teacher chosen to go to space.
Space flight today really seems safe.
The night before, an engineer begged NASA not to launch, certain it would fail. He was right, and they launched anyway.
You can feel the excitement here at Kennedy Space Center right now, and in less than a minute we'll be able to feel the Challenger taking off.
But the explosion, as you saw, was a tremendous and disastrous one.
On the morning of the 28th of January, 1986, a school teacher named Krista McAuliffe put on a blue flight suit and told her students back in New Hampshire she'd wave to them from space. She never got the chance. 73 seconds is all it took. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why those 73 seconds happened and why almost everyone who could have stopped it chose not to. 7 people were on board that day: a commander, a pilot, 3 mission specialists, a payload engineer, and Krista, the first ordinary civilian NASA had ever sent to space, chosen out of over 11,000 applicants. Millions of American school children were watching live in classrooms because of her. NASA had built an entire narrative around this launch. Space travel made routine, made safe, made normal enough for a teacher to do it. That narrative is part of why what happened next is so hard to sit with. The night before launch, engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, got on a conference call with NASA officials. Their concern was simple. It was going to be cold that morning, colder than any previous shuttle launch. And they had data suggesting that in cold temperatures, a rubber seal called an O-ring, the thing meant to keep hot gas from escaping the rocket boosters, could stiffen and fail to seal properly. One engineer, Bob Ebeling, told his wife that night he thought the shuttle was going to blow up. He wasn't guessing, he'd seen the numbers. He argued for hours to delay the launch. NASA management pushed back. The launch had already been delayed multiple times, and there was pressure, public pressure, political pressure, scheduling pressure to fly. By midnight, Thiokol's own managers reversed their engineers' recommendation and gave NASA the green light. The temperature at launch time the next morning was 36 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 degrees colder than any previous flight. At 11:38 a.m., Challenger lifted off. For the first 59 seconds, everything looked normal. Cameras on the ground caught a small puff of gray smoke near one of the booster joints in the first few seconds after ignition, but no one watching live noticed it. It wouldn't be found until investigators reviewed the footage frame by frame afterward. That smoke was the O-ring failing to seal. Cold rubber, doing exactly what the engineers feared. At around 58 seconds, a flame appeared at that same joint. By 64 seconds, it had grown into a continuous plume, burning directly against the external fuel tank. At 73 seconds, the fuel tank ruptured. What people remember most isn't the explosion itself. It's what happened on the ground right after.
I don't believe so. I'm certain that the president will feel compelled to mention this, depending on the outcome of what we learn here in a few minutes.
Mission Control's flight dynamics officer can be heard on the recording almost mechanically, reading data as if the vehicle was still intact, because for a few seconds, no one fully processed what they'd just seen. In the stands, Krista McAuliffe's parents were watching, her students were watching. The cheering turned into a silence that a lot of people who were there still describe as the loudest silence they've ever heard. The shuttle didn't explode into nothing. The crew cabin, largely intact, continued upward before falling nearly 9 miles into the Atlantic Ocean. NASA's later investigation found strong evidence that at least some of the crew survived the initial breakup and may have been conscious for part of the fall. The investigation that followed, the Rogers Commission, found the technical cause almost immediately: the O-ring, exactly as the engineers had warned. But the deeper cause was organizational. NASA had a culture where flight schedules and public image had started to outweigh engineering caution. Warnings had been raised before. They'd been raised and normalized and eventually ignored because previous flights had gotten away with the same risk without consequence. Physicist Richard Feynman, brought onto the investigating commission, demonstrated the entire failure live on television, dropping a piece of O-ring material into a glass of ice water, then showing how it lost its flexibility almost instantly. It took him about 10 seconds to show what NASA management hadn't been willing to hear the night before launch. Bob Ebeling, the engineer who tried to stop the launch, carried what happened for the rest of his life. He gave interviews decades later, still convinced he could have done more. NASA eventually told him on the record that the failure wasn't his. It was a decision made above him, under pressure he didn't have the power to override. 7 people did not come home that day, for reasons that had nothing to do with the unknown risks of space, and everything to do with a warning that was heard clearly and set aside anyway. That's usually how it goes with disasters like this. Not a mystery. A memo somebody didn't want to act on.